institutions. And while you're here to kind of learn some, just recognize that you're probably already doing a lot of great stuff. And so I hope I can share some ideas that will prompt some additional thoughts. And I asked Kelly to kind of step in on occasion, when she feels like she wants to add to what they're doing differently. We have very different labs, I think, even though they're both focused on education research. And I think that's an important point to make up front, is that these labs need to take the shape that they need to take for your institution, for the group of people that you're working with. And so one size does not fit all. And so what has started for us has actually even morphed quite a bit over the past 5 years. And so I just wanted to share very briefly, this is actually my presentation from CSM in 2023. And so you may have seen some of this before, but I'm just going to pull out a few pieces for those that haven't. And it looks like I can share screen. So we're going to go ahead and share. And so hopefully you all can see the screen now. I'm trying to find you. I see some head nods. Okay, great. In the early days, our lab really started out as a group of faculty who, hold on a second, a group of faculty who just were interested in doing education research. We were uniprofessional at the time. We just had physical therapy faculty engaging in this conversation. There were no students participating. We had monthly meetings, sometimes twice a month, depending on what it was. We were in person pre-COVID and then shifted to essentially virtual since COVID, and we haven't gone back. We found ourselves to be really just a teaching support group. It's 6 faculty who are heavily involved with teaching in the PT program. And we just thought, let's talk about our experiences. Let's figure out ways to do better. We just wanted to kind of grow in that capacity. It was very informal in nature, and it was focused primarily on a specific project that we worked on back then called the Learn PT rubric. And then based on our experience of learners in the program. And then we developed goals related to that research project. But then over time, things have changed pretty significantly. In fact, before we started anything, we just spent 6 months as a group talking about education research and education theory, because we knew that we were lacking in that understanding that is needed to really do education research well. So we formalized the lab in 2018. In 2022, we became interprofessional by adding athletic training, one of our faculty colleagues in our department. And then we added Brian Seiler, who's currently actually not in our department. He's at our simulation center here on campus, but is still a member of our lab, just not a core member. And then in 2021, we changed our lab's name from Learn PT to the Learn Lab to make it more inclusive, and actually changed our goals and our mission. So these are the folks currently in the lab. Although I need to add too, this is an old presentation. Becky Bliss, who is on this call, is also at our university, and she is a member of our lab as well. And then also Mike Jones has joined us this past January. So they are also both members of our lab. So Becky, sorry about not getting this updated prior to today. But you can see there's a lot of folks here, and what I've listed under each person's name is their kind of interest area as it relates to education research. So you'll see there's a lot of diversity in what we're interested in, which I think is really good and beneficial. There's a lot of, I guess, shared competency or interests, which allows for potential collaborations among the faculty in our program. One thing I want to emphasize is that a lot of these interest areas relate specifically to our roles in the program. So I encourage you, whoever is doing education research, try to make it tied to what you do on a day-to-day basis, because if you don't, it's going to be hard to find the time. And so that's a very common question I get, is how do you guys find the time? And I think part of it is we try to align it with our roles in the program. Our mission is to be a leader in collaborative education research across the health professions, not just PT, and to inspire exemplary healthcare education research through innovative, impactful, and collaborative education research. So yes, as a lab, like all other research labs, we developed a mission, a vision, we have goals, we have metrics, we have all those things that are true of the other research labs in our department that are not education research labs. And I think that's really important because it allows for us to be working with the same currency as our colleagues, and not literal currency, but actually kind of looking the same, feeling the same, getting some of the voice that other labs also have. We have strategic priorities that have goals, expected outcomes, measures, and targets, and we look at those every year at our annual meeting. And then right now, we are department supported. Our education research is a pillar of our department's research agenda. So we have 3 essentially primary focuses right now, but education research is one of them. So we have great leadership who saw the value of having an education research lab because it does inform our teaching and our outcomes. And so she has been tremendously supportive in giving us the space and time we need. And then we also are interprofessional, as I mentioned before, and we do have students now rotating through our lab regularly that are part of our PhD program. in addition to DPT students working on projects with faculty that are all education research in nature. We do have monthly meetings. These meetings take a different structure depending on kind of what we need to do, but generally, as I mentioned before, the typical meeting agenda has applause where we celebrate each other's accomplishments. We move through updates and reminders. In fact, I just updated at our last meeting when the abstracts are due for ELC and CSM. We talk about the assistance that we each need as individual researchers. We talk about anything that needs discussion. And then we have a research spotlight or a journal article discussion. So if someone wants to present an article they found that's really interesting and possibly relevant to education research, they bring it forward, we dialogue about it. We have a lot of fun conversing, and then we talk about when the next meeting will take place, usually scheduled on a regular basis. And again, we have that annual assessment each year in May. So as far as productivity, we've had, over the past 5 years, we've had 56 presentations, 14 peer-reviewed publications, 5 grants, 3 funded, and then 3 books out of our lab. And so again, these are metrics that people think about and talk about. And so we want to measure those metrics, but we also are looking at things beyond these things. So looking at innovation, impact, looking at the things that are maybe not as tangible. And so these are some of the other metrics we're looking at. We're looking at leadership roles related to education research. We're looking at, teaching awards. We're looking at how many people are pursuing their PhD right now in our lab. So a lot of those different metrics are important and important to consider beyond just the typical metrics of publications and grants. And then the ripple effects is that, our department is being elevated from a teaching perspective because we're spending a lot of time talking about it. We have a program, of course, a DPT program. We want to improve our outcomes. And so that's something that's a benefit. From a faculty perspective, it's an opportunity for us, and Becky is spearheading our faculty development research. And so she is looking at how our engagement of faculty around scholarship of teaching and learning improves their ability to actually develop as educators, but also create a better end product. We find that there's a lot more belonging related to the 6 of us and Becky and Mike and also our AT faculty, because we have colleagues that we can share our ideas with, which is fantastic. Many of you might feel like an island unto yourself when it comes to education research. And so grab a buddy, grab a partner, even if they're not at your institution, to start dialoguing. That's where it all began for us. And then for our students, it really increases their metacognition. We think that it improves student learning and learning outcomes. And then, of course, it gives a lot of research experience and education for our students as well. So those are some of the highlights related to the Learn PT Lab. It's constantly a growing process. We just kind of are kind of kicking off, but we started this probably in November of last year, our education research priorities for the next foreseeable future because of some of the changes in our program that are coming down the line. And so we've had a lot of fun over the past 4 months, really talking about our priorities for education research and thinking about resources on many of the things that many of you probably have questions about. We are intentionally dialoguing about those right now. So hopefully that gives you in a nutshell, a quick snapshot of kind of what the Learn Lab is doing right now. And so I would love to invite Kelly to share about Duke and what they're doing, and other colleagues of hers, Jamie Greco, I think, and Katie Myers as well, related to the Duke Learn Lab or Education Lab. Thanks, Sarah. I will stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Steve, for getting us so much on how you all got started and have grown and developed. And I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to talk about how this process is going at Duke. And I think, one of the things that Steve and Kelly and I had talked about before everybody else jumped on was exactly what Steve pointed to, is that this needs to be unique to your setting, right? So this is where it's so great to be able to bring in folks from 2 different institutions that have this up and running. And then also, that we can have some time to dialogue about what this might look like at our institutions. So Kelly, go ahead. You should have screen sharing. So go ahead and share.
How did that come up properly? We'll hope it doesn't continue to advance on its own like it did earlier. Well, thank you. I agree with Sarah. I'm on the Scholarship of Education SIG with Sarah. But our Education Innovation Lab is really a very big group effort and a collaborative project. So I'm very happy that Jamie Greco and Katie Myers, who are both big drivers of turning this into something formal, are on the call. And I have asked them to jump in as much as they'd like to contribute to this conversation. So this was probably a similar start to the Learn Lab. in that it was initially when I started at Duke in 2019, we sort of had informal meetings, and I'd say it was kind of a ragtag band of people that were interested in education research. And we would have sporadic meetings and kind of spitball ideas and talk about things. But over time, that's really developed into something more formal. And part of that process was giving the lab a title, which may not seem like a lot, but it really adds to, again, to the formality of the process. And Jamie and I were chatting yesterday, and she reminded me, kind of like Steve said, you know, there's lots of people that are our colleagues that have physical labs that are basic science or clinical science labs. And we believe that education research is just as important, and really calling ourselves a lab was intentional. We're very deliberate about that. So if you're thinking about doing this at your institution, that might be something kind of worth considering too, even if you're not necessarily in a physical lab space. All right, all right, I think we're in the right spot. So I won't go to give you a big lecture about the scholarship of teaching and learning and Boyer's model and Uniscope and all of that. But it was something, again, that we were thoughtful and intentional about kind of the history of the scholarship of teaching and learning, and thinking about that in the lab and trying to align the different areas that we wanted to research with those sort of historical models, and then also some models in physical therapy education. So I've just included those resources here, and I think we can probably include them within our Scholarship of Education SIG page if you want to go back and look at those, but thinking about the many different ways that we might promote education research in our division. So these are the 5 kind of main areas of focus that we have: curriculum, assessment and evaluation, clinical education, interprofessional education, and then what we call our faculty focus. And then we also have quite a bit of thought and initiatives around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, different components of JEDI. And we thread that throughout all 5 of those sort of pillars of our education innovation lab. And then we have kind of subcategories within each of those 5 main categories that we're interested in looking at and thinking about. And I think I was trying to remember, oh yes, when Steve, kind of you mentioned, we sort of have the same thing. We have a lot of people with very different interests. And so we have some people very interested in clinical education, some people very interested in leadership and leadership development, some very interested in admissions and assessment and all. And so we have kind of different people affiliated with different areas of the lab, but we all work collectively and collaboratively on projects. The faculty focus on the right, I'll talk about in just a minute, but we also have at Duke a faculty development residency program where we have faculty residents in-house. And one of their requirements is to submit an education research project. They have to present that at the end of their residency. They have to submit an abstract to a conference and produce at least a draft of a manuscript. So there was some mentoring going on, and that's kind of what the faculty focus piece refers to. So one of the things that I think has really been valuable and is sort of special about this is that we have quite a few faculty that have an education research focus. So we have additional kind of training, and that is the area that we research. We don't all research the same areas, but kind of the 5 of us that you see here all have terminal degree training with an education research focus. So that has been very helpful in kind of facilitating putting together a lab, is that there's so many of us that really like this area. And she'll probably hate me for this, but Dr. Katie Myers successfully defended her PhD dissertation last week on a clinical education research project. So I wanted to make sure I called her out on that. And then these are, yes, yay, Katie. These are our faculty development residents. So as I mentioned, Katie, Kyle, and Jamie on the previous slide are all heavily involved in the faculty development residency. So they were already doing, prior to the lab, quite a bit of mentoring of the faculty residents in education research. And so having kind of this development of a lab allowed that to be a little bit more of a formalized process. So a few things that we do, we have education research roundtables where we meet monthly, and these can, sometimes we're generating ideas for what kind of group research projects we might want to do. We're working collaboratively, again, to kind of pose and refine questions. Sometimes we have big questions that need to be refined down into a very specific and researchable question. And then that also allows some time for mentorship and discussion. So those are only about an hour once a month. And I would say initially we were having a lot more sort of discussion and conversation of what we wanted things to look like. And then over time that's evolved, and what we decided to do was put together a research project, a singular research project that the Education Research Lab would work on collectively. And anyone that was interested can sort of be part of the lab. And there's a fair amount of mentoring going on between either more junior faculty or people less familiar with certain kind of research methods in this one project. And it lets us kind of, again, work together to put together something tangible for an output. So this slide, this may be a little bit tricky to see. I apologize if it's really teeny tiny, but this is a sample of a project timeline that I think Jamie primarily put together and that we are trying to go through over time. So, you know, when we decided we were going to develop a question together, and we kind of spitballed, and then we, you know, refined the question, and then we did a lit review, all of the sort of typical research processes. But we did that as a group, or I should say we're doing it. We're in the data collection phase for a particular project right now. It was really important for us to establish this timeline so that people knew what was going to happen when and where they were going to be most involved in a given project. And that way they could make choices around like their teaching schedule or other commitments they have. You know, if we said, well, we're going to submit the IRB in May, and, you know, you teach an 8-credit course in May, that might not be a good alignment for you and the particular project. So that was another piece that was really valuable in finding out kind of where each person might fit into the project, but also making sure that they knew what the commitment would be with everything else that we all have going on. So as I mentioned, we are currently underway in a qualitative study. And within that study, there's a fair amount of mentoring of, again, junior faculty, residents, and then in this particular project, people that are just less familiar with qualitative methods. So there are some people that are really well-versed in research, but are primarily quantitative researchers and have not been participating extensively in qualitative methods. So those folks that want to beef up learning about qualitative methods can be mentored through this process as well. So just as an example, right, we have some of our faculty residents and our more junior researchers participating in developing and writing the research question, submitting an IRB for the first time. So we just sort of pair people, you know, that have more experience that way, developing a survey or developing an interview guide, things like that. And then going forward, some of our goals are to really expand this so we don't just have one project going at any given time, but we thought it would be ideal to start with one and then progress before we have 3 or 4 tracks sort of running concurrently. But so we would like to do this again with more research designs, potentially some more quantitative and some mixed methods designs, and potentially have 2 or 3 things going. Also continuing to mentor the same kind of more junior faculty through the end of the process. How do you submit to a journal, or how do you write a manuscript, things like that. And then a kind of longer term goal that I think a lot of people struggle with in education research is finding grant funding for education research. So one, doing that within the lab, but which we have not done extensively, but also mentoring some of the younger researchers in what that process looks like. So I know we did have, Sarah gave us access to some of the questions in advance, and there seemed to be quite a few questions on how do you fund this and how do you manage effort. So I definitely wanted to address that. And if Jamie and Katie may want to add to this also. This is just very specific to Duke's program. Every faculty member is given 5% effort for scholarship, even if you don't have any funding for scholarship. And so in talking to other colleagues, that seems to vary quite a bit from institution to institution. In all honesty, historically, scholarship was only funded if you had funding, if you actually had funding for your time. And so this was a relatively new thing where everybody gets 5% effort for scholarship, which isn't a ton, but it's about a day a month that you can dedicate to that. So that's I mentioned that because I think it's really important too, in thinking about this, of how your program might support education research. And this is one of the ways that our program really showed that they are committed to and dedicated to education research, was giving us some effort for some of this work that people have been doing otherwise, kind of unallocated effort previously. And then we also have a number of grants that have funded education research work for a number of our colleagues, and I've kind of listed some of those out here. And we're really fortunate. We have an organization within the health professions at Duke. It's called Duke Ahead, which is the Academy for Health Professions Education and Academic Development. But they have a number of priorities, but they are very specific to education research. So we have some opportunities for education research across the different allied health professions and the School of Medicine. And they also have some funding opportunities with smaller grants, but 2 tiers, up to $5,000 and up to $10,000 opportunities. So that can help fund some of the projects that we're interested in doing. And then finally, these are all things that I've sort of talked about, but I think some of the things that have helped us a lot and are worth thinking about as you might put forward your own lab. Some of the facilitators are things like we have significant institutional support. So I mentioned the grant opportunities. We do have a promotion and tenure track that is called the Practice of Medical Education. And so within that track, the criterion for promotion and tenure are things like excellence in curricular design, evaluation and assessment, excellence in faculty development, administration, scholarly activity, including research involving medical education. So like the fact that we have the ability to move up, in promotion and tenure with a heavy focus on education research is really valuable within the institution. And then we have obviously Duke Ahead. We also have a Center for Teaching and Learning, which I can, potentially talk about later. I know somebody asked a question about how sort of big university centers might be the same or different than what we're doing. And then, as I mentioned, Jamie and Katie are on the call, and also with Kyle Covington, the 3 of them have really been champions for pushing and developing and progressing and formalizing this lab. And I think that it's also critical that you have people within your program that are going to spearhead this and kind of push it forward over and over again, because it doesn't happen independently. So I hope that wasn't too long on my summary.
Kelly, can I just add one thing that I think is a really important piece that has been a facilitator, and it really shows the evolution of this lab and the support from the institution and our division. We were able to have a education research GA position approved this past year. We've traditionally had research GAs that have been typically involved in clinical research within the division, and we were able to get an approval for a position for a student GA to be involved in education research and support that in the faculty. And that particular GA has been instrumental in supporting our group project, and we actually have approval to continue to have a second. And it's really shown just how much work I think is involved in education research. and has also just supported the efforts, not only for the lab, but some individual faculty have also utilized that GA to support their education research projects. So I think that's just another way to look at facilitating and supporting this work within your program and within your division. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off that, Katie, so it is interesting because we actually were fortunate for about 1.5 years to have departmental support for a graduate research assistant, which was absolutely fantastic. Now we don't have one currently, but again, once we get more grants, that's something that we're going to, tie into the grant applications and propose, because it is really so completely helpful. And like you said, it really speaks to the department's support of the lab by having a GA appointment. So I just want to second what you just shared.
I think it's great exposure for the student to a different aspect of research as well. Just, students don't learn a lot about qualitative research and particularly education research overall. So I think it's been, at least for this one particular student, really interesting, I hope. And then I think we have hope that it might expand into, ways that we can get, as you mentioned, Steve, getting more students involved in education research and exposed to that arena.
Can I just say one other thing about, and thank you for Katie and Kelly and Steve for you were the inspiration behind this whole thing. So thank you, Steve. I just want to address the mentoring piece. So that was really important to us, especially given the fact that we know now that, not that we didn't know it before, but there's evidence to show that there are a lot of barriers to engaging in education research, especially for the novice researcher. And specifically, there is a lack in training, there is a lack in time, and there's a lack in mentoring. And I think one of the hardest parts about engaging in education research as a novice person is even just thinking of an idea about what you would like to investigate. So just getting your foot in the door in terms of, I don't know what to even start. Like, I don't even know where to start. And I feel like our lab group mentoring project really checks all of those boxes. Even speaking to what Katie said about, funding and time, we are not given a lot of time, but a lot of hands make less work. So I'm just so proud of that piece of our lab. And I think, like Kelly said, we're hoping it just really takes off. So that's all I wanted to add.
Well, I just want to say thank you, first of all, to, sort of everyone, all the Duke folks, and to Steve for, sharing where you're at, where you've gotten going. And I actually think, already just by looking at the two groups, we've seen, there's some differences based on your context, your university. And really, what I sort of was taking away is, there's a lot of creative work that's gone into this in terms of identifying the problems and the challenges within your institution and figuring out how to, how to use your group to pull this together. I was going to say, I've been joking because I very selfishly wanted this session because I'm working on starting a group with the Tufts teams. But one of the things I wanted to share from another kind of model of a lab group was from when I was in my PhD program, which wasn't all education. I was in an education PhD, but we had different lab groups, either based on topic focuses or like ours was specifically a qualitative. And so just to provide another illustration, ours was more, rather than I think what both Kansas City and Duke have done, where there's been, common projects, our lab also provided space for individuals to bring their work and seek feedback from the group. So that was another, just sort of to add another piece to what a lab group can be, is if you are in an institution where you already have faculty members that are maybe individually working on projects, that a lab group can create a space where you can bring your project. And, some of the things that we did within our lab group were things like sharing, especially within qualitative, kind of sharing what you're doing, sharing your question, and then exploring sort of, how do I want to code my data? What kind of approach to coding? Or sometimes it was stages then of like looking for support in how to present your data. So multiple different pieces, and very similar to I think what Jamie was saying about that step, because I think in qualitative research and educational research overall, that focusing down So bringing it from this, like, I have this big idea to get down to a researchable question is something that group feedback is huge for. So I think just to kind of throw those out for other opportunities. I think the other thing, before we just open it up to questions, I also want to bounce around, because I found the question that came in from the survey about, what's the difference between this and like your university center for teaching and learning? I will sort of speak to my perspective, but I also want to hear from the folks that are engaged in their labs. The way I look at it is the Center for Teaching and Learning is really for the faculty development component. It's where faculty can go if they're looking for new strategies for teaching, looking for new strategies for assessment. Whereas the education research labs are more focused on the doing side of the research. Obviously, I think, as both groups have illustrated, there's a carryover. In doing that research, it also improves, your outcomes, or even just the process of engaging it improves that teaching and learning within your program. But yeah, I want to hand it over. So maybe I'm just going to tag to Steve and get your thoughts on the difference between these two kind of entities.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. So we do not have a teaching and learning center here at the Medical Center campus, but we do have one at the Lawrence campus, which is about 30 minutes away from us at the large University of Kansas. However, we really tapped into them, kind of to Sarah's point, we tapped into them as a resource for us when we were in that process of learning about learning and really trying to understand things. And they actually recommended the book called How Learning Works, 8 research-based principles for smart teaching by Susan Ambrose and some colleagues. And that was one of the most beneficial things. So we actually spent a few months just going through that book and each chapter dialoguing about, what does effective teaching look like and how does this intersect with our ideas related to research. And so they really were a resource for us. It's very different than the lab, which is, as everybody has mentioned today, that conversation, that opportunity or space to dialogue, whether it's because it's a mentorship conversation or it's because I need someone to kind of poke holes in my education research ideas. That's really what this lab really does, is it creates that space for conversation, which is something that doesn't happen enough in education research. And it allows for example, we just presented to our entire department about the lab and all the research interests of each of the lab members. And we have some potential collaborations. They're coming to our future lab meetings to talk about how they can use, for example, the eye tracking device as it relates to education research. Like, who would have thought? Yep, but there's some great ideas. Or how does sleep impact learning? So we have some researchers in our department who are doing clinical research that are potential collaborators for our education research as well. And so those dialogue spaces are absolutely critical. And that's really what this lab is. We have those research spotlights during our meetings where a lab member will bring a question forward or they want to share about their research, and we dialogue about that. And that maybe spins off additional conversation. So the lab really is almost like a think tank in a sense for education research. And that's one of the benefits of the lab. And so I highly encourage you to start the conversation somewhere. Even if it's not a formal lab, you can still have those conversations because that's how we started. So that was maybe a long-winded answer, but that gives you some insight.
Yeah, I'll tag over to Kelly and Jamie if you want to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw this question and I have absolutely loved our Center for Teaching and Learning as exactly like Steve said, is a resource to help develop me as a faculty member and my teaching abilities. And our Center for Teaching and Learning does do some research. They do some education research, but we're a really large university, and our Center for Teaching and Learning is slightly, in my estimation, like more focused on the undergraduate side a bit. And so they're not going to do education research focused on physical therapy or focused on the allied health professions or focused on our program specifically. So there's kind of space for both, and we certainly individually and as a lab have utilized them as a resource, but I don't think they're going to ask the same questions that we as PTs and PT educators are going to ask.
Interestingly, just to comment on that, it's interesting because we found that our Teaching Learning Center is really focused on undergraduate education, which is fantastic and very essential, but they're also really focused on resourcing instructors at the large campus related to teaching. How do you teach well? And that's really kind of the emphasis they have. And so while we do use them as a resource, it definitely is different. In fact, I have a vision of creating a center for research, education research excellence at our university on the university side, because there's such a need for that and there's so much opportunity when we have a campus of 18 different programs. And so again, to your point, Kelly, I think they're a great resource, but they really don't focus on some of the things we would need to focus on.
Yeah, I think great insights on that topic. And I think, and I think that's one of the things, and I think for a lot of us that have gotten into PT research, it really is because it's like, yeah, we can take these insights from, undergraduate teaching and teaching, and the learning sciences in general, but there's very specifics that come down to the nature of PT education that's even different than medical education. So it's like we can learn from their literature. And I think, as Kelly and Steve both pointed to, that's a real driving reason for doing the research, and then also for these labs, because I absolutely agree. I think that having this space to foster these discussions that are raising the questions, and sometimes it's raising the questions that then maybe you're not pursuing a formal research project, but it may impact how you engage in your classroom or how you think about your teaching or assessment. So I think those are some places that can really serve. I wanted to touch on one other question that had popped up about the funding stuff, because I think Kelly definitely highlighted sort of a number of these different places that a lot of institutions do have intramural funding, like small grant kind of stuff that can apply. I know I had gotten small grants from an institution that there weren't any boundaries. It was really, you write your proposal, and it's not like there's this much for this type of project. It was just a flat out small grant. The other part, kind of as operating as the liaison to the Academy of Education, is the reminder that the Academy is now offering small grants as well. So in the fall, so the submissions usually go in October 1st. There's always been a larger grant that's been, maybe up to 20,000, but they're now focusing on doing kind of seed grant, small grant, pilot grant, up to like 5,000, which can be a great place. And this is something, I always comment on, that compared to some of the basic science and clinical stuff, you actually can do education research on a much lower budget. Yes, we still need a budget. It's not that we don't need funding at all, but you're not looking at this like, multi-$1,000 equipment that you're needing to get. So I definitely recommend that you keep your eyes peeled for those. And the Foundation for PT Research does every other year has a grant, and it's a 40,000. So now we're on the bigger side of projects, but these are something, especially if you are working within a larger team, there's a $40,000 grant every other year. And I think applications applications go in around July. It's either June or July of this year for the education one, and then it won't come up again for 2 years. So those are just some other opportunities to keep in mind. I think at this point, I mean, first of all, I don't know, Steve, Kelly, Jamie, if there's anything else you want to put out. Otherwise, I'm happy to open this to questions. So yeah, anything more that our presenters want to share?
Hey, Sarah, I think one thing I look from the list of questions that, we received from folks prior to the session, one of the things that I saw maybe a couple times was talking about if you don't have folks, for example, at your institution that are interested in collaborating on education research, how do you reach across the divide of, different locations, different spaces? And I just want to emphasize that, I think it can be done. I do a lot of interprofessional education research, and most of my projects are not just here at the medical center. Many of them are bridged across institutions. And I think, again, it comes back to starting the conversation. I think CSM, ELC, these are great places to start networking and talking about common shared ideas. But I would also like to highlight, Sarah, if you could talk about the resource related to that for the Scholarship of Education SIG.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for tagging that out. So actually sort of two things that I'm thinking about with respect to the SIG in general. We are starting to actually work. If you had been in the Academy website lately, we've had a whole website overhaul. And you now, everybody has what we call your member compass. So you can go in and essentially pull up your profile. And we are starting to work on being able to add tags. And so if you go into your mentor compass, there's an area to add some tags about research interests. We are limited right now. We're still building out the list. But that is another way. Actually, one moment, I might as well. Hang on. Let me just do a screen share, and I'm going to take you on a tour of the website, because I think this is, especially for folks who maybe haven't been to the website in a while, this is sort of a great place to look at it. I just pulled it up. First of all, one more reminder, April 3rd is the next journal club. But if you go to the website and then you come down to this area on special interest groups, that's how you can access our Scholarship of Education website, which I will tell you a couple of things. First of all, the recording and PowerPoints from today will be posted under these SIG discussions. We have some recordings from past discussions. We also have the PowerPoints from CSM and from ELC. CSM, we were talking about professional development. ELC was about funding. So again, if those are topics you have interest in, please go explore. But the how we explore, we've started this, and I will tell you, this is I'm calling it the beta testing phase. This is, it's not perfect yet, but hopefully with feedback from you all, we can really flesh this out and make it a useful tool for connecting. So under this research mentor database, if you click view database, it's going to bring this up. And the key is you need to work with the filters. This keyword search is not quite working right yet. So if you hit filter, you get certain areas of expertise. And these are just the starting list. We're still working on taking in more topics. So if there is a topic that you're like, this would be an important one to connect on, please shoot me an email. And we can get that added. But for example, if you pull down to clinical reasoning, what it will do now is anyone that has tagged themselves with clinical reasoning in their profile will come up. So this is a way that you can search for other people that have a similar interest in a research area. So that is one of the methods. If we then clear filters, for example, then if we want to look at folks that are interested in admissions, you see it pulls up yet another list. You can tag yourself with as many tags as you want. So if you have multiple interests, and again, one of the filters is quantitative or qualitative. So if you are specifically looking for other qualitative researchers, you can use that filter and it will pull up a subset there. And so in order to add those tags, if you go up to your profile, hang on, I got to move my, it'll take you to this member compass. You go to profile here, and the areas of expertise, this is where you can add tags. If you just click on it, it's only going to let you choose from the list that we've currently generated. So once again, if there's a topic that you feel is really is one that would be a key area and it's missing, please email me and I can work with the website folks to get that added in. So so that is one route to finding connections within the SIG. Obviously, there's some other pathways too that are a little more just, I guess I would say, informal. Number one, I think all of the times, every time we've had meetings in person, ELC and CSM, always end up with great conversations and connections. And that's, it's another way kind of to find people. Sometimes you just start on a conversation and that starts something that you connect over a common interest. The other thing is that we do have these Zoom discussions. We shoot for every other month. that is actually another area that we take requests on. So if there is a topic that you would like to see more information on, once again, you can get my email through the website. Shoot me an email and just say, hey, this is a topic we're really interested in. And then as a leadership team, we usually will work together to plan out. And it usually is like this, it's semi-presentation and then open for discussion. And those are some other places that you can connect with folks. So definitely different ways. And especially if there's anybody on here that's not a member of the SIG yet, we invite you to join, because then you will get our notifications about all of these topics. So yes, please make use. This is, and I will also share, I think sort of what Steve said from a personal level. I have had people just either reaching out to me from SIG stuff. You know, I've done multiple different presentations and projects with people that, you know, we just connected over a common interest. Actually, I will say one of them, I had some ELC presentations last year with someone that it actually started through the chat on a Jopti Journal Club. So, you know, those are the places that, you know, the little pieces that can add up. So with that, I would love to open this up. We've got about 10 more minutes. If there's questions from the audience, I would say just use your raise hand feature so you'll pop up and I will see you. If you've got anything. All right, Jeff, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Steve and Kelly. This was great. Both of you described this process of kind of going from informal to formal, and I was just curious if there's anything you wish you would have formalized earlier along that process. I'm particularly thinking of, Kelly, you mentioned the title for the lab was maybe one of those steps. So I was just wondering if there's anything else along those lines that you wish you would have sort of been a little more formal about earlier that would have had benefits.
Kelly, do you want to go first?
You go ahead. I'm thinking
Sure.
about it.
Yeah, so so we were very informal initially, and so it was kind of a long process for us, and so but I think one of the things that we probably underestimated how much time it would take was getting our website up, and so but as a research lab, all of our labs in our department have a website, and I think that also was a great resource for us when we started presenting at CSM and so forth, for folks to actually kind of see what we're about, to start to engage that. So that was something that took a little bit more time than anticipated, and is continuing to take some time as you update the website and make changes and so forth. So I think that was one, and something we didn't start early, but we now have a really robust process for, is establishing goals, metrics, and targets. Because while the lab exists, I think it is important to have structure. I love what Kelly presented about their structure related to the focal areas and kind of their process for the timelines related to research projects, but really thinking about what are our priorities as a lab, how do you measure outcomes related to the lab. That's something where we've grown a ton in the past couple of years, and we actually used our process to help inform our department strategic planning, because it was really helpful. We have some folks in the lab who are really oriented towards, mission, vision, goals, expected outcomes, targets, et cetera. And so I think that's important, because you want to make sure that what you're doing is actually producing something that's valuable. And so not just from publications and grants, but also looking at how are we being impactful? How are we being innovative in what we do? How are we collaborating effectively with people, not just within our lab, but also external to our lab? How are we moving the profession forward as it relates to education research? And so thinking about goals, and as it relates to your vision and mission for your lab, those I think we could have started a lot sooner and probably would be further along than where we are now. But I think that would be something that I would encourage folks to really be intentional with and think about. I don't know, Kelly, if you all have something similar as far as goals and metrics, but that's something we would have liked to have probably started sooner.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say that something that I've learned from you that I think, and this is just my opinion, not necessarily everybody in the lab, but we don't have a formal mission and vision. I think we have a sort of shared understanding of what we think we're doing, but it would probably be nice to put that into a more formal actual mission and vision for the lab. And once we got going kind of full steam ahead on this research project, like we've said, that takes up most of the time of our lab meetings now, and there's tremendous value in that. So I would love to have or consider maybe a second meeting per month where we can do some of the other, or kind of address some of the other priorities, or we're focusing heavily on that, but think about what are the metrics, what are the outcomes that we want to measure, what are some other projects we might want to get started. But I've been
Yeah.
really impressed too, though, like kind of how far we've come in a relatively short period of time, and actually producing something. So I
Which
think
is
all
great.
of those would be valuable to connect kind of what you've done and add those into our lab
Mhm.
too.
Kelly, I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I
No
agree
worries.
with you entirely. I think, one of the things we found is that the business of having a lab and the meetings oftentimes get consumed by business and not so much the education research. And so we actually have started to have separate meetings. We did for a while have 2 meetings a month, but then that went away during COVID because we were all scrambling. And then we're starting to look at how we can do that now. So we've incorporated those highlights or the spotlight research kind of discussions during the meetings that are shorter, probably 20, 30 minutes. But then our meetings are an hour and a half. And so they're not just an hour. But then we are having more meetings external to our actual lab meetings where we engage the research agenda a little bit more specifically, because it is hard to do that while you also have a lab meeting with a lot of those things that you need to assess. So I just want to reiterate what Kelly said. It can quickly become time can quickly get eaten if you aren't intentional and specific with creating structure for that time to be dialoguing about education research. So just want to support what Kelly is saying.
I just have one other thing to add. So again, this was probably more true in the early days when we had COVID and, we were still trying to feel out our structure, when sometimes we would just, if we didn't have a lot to discuss, we would just cancel the meeting. And I feel like now I wish we hadn't done that. I wish, because now if we find that we don't have as full of an agenda, we've actually said we are going to hold the meeting. We're going to still hold the hour, whatever it is. You should come to the lab, which again, we don't have a lab, we have a conference room, and work on your scholarship. Because again, I feel like as a more experienced researcher, one of the really important lessons in terms of keeping your research agenda is going is making time and respecting that time and not canceling something, especially your research. You carve out time to dedicate to research, respect that time, and use it to actually to do something related to your research, whether it's writing a paragraph or whatever, doing some reading, whatever it is. But I think we have to model that we respect the time that we're given for our research, and we're not going to cancel it. We're going to make it productive in another way. So I wish we had started to do that and model that sooner. And I know that's something small, but it just stuck with me today. So
I actually think that's actually another great, just a great piece to recognize is protecting your research time. And, because I think for a lot of us, the research is what we fit in between our teaching and our service and our everything else. And it is one of the things we've also played with on these Zoom discussions is having some of them, like last year, shortly before the CSM poster platform abstract deadline, we did a Zoom discussion that really was just devoted writing time. So it was something you could put on your calendar, block that out, get on the Zoom. And what we did was we were a fairly small group on that one, but at the beginning of the hour, we shared what our goals for that hour was. And then pretty much we all just left our Zoom open and worked on our own things and did a wrap up at the end. The other part that actually can be helpful with those is sometimes doing a paper trade, right? So you wrote your one paragraph and maybe somebody else wrote their one paragraph. Trade them, read them, because as we all know, it's so helpful to have external eyes on things. So yeah, that's a great point to put forward, is sometimes the lab time can be protected work time. I know we're coming up on the hour, and I want to respect folks' time in that sense, especially I know we're moving into Friday afternoon, even for those of us on what I'm now calling the late coast over here. But any other questions before we wrap up for today? And I do also want to put forward, as you can always reach me through it's a chair SOE SIG at APTA Academy. You can literally just get it from the SIG website. So I'm always happy to take additional questions, definitely happy to take requests for topics, because as a SIG, we are here to serve our members. And so the more input we get from members of topics that could be helpful, the more that we can provide for things that really serve our members. So with that, I would like to say thank you to Kelly and Steve, and also Jamie. And I know Katie had to jump off, because I think we all really appreciate getting to learn from your knowledge and experience. And my hope is that a lot of us can move forward with, inspiring these in our own programs or campuses. And I think I am going to say my one takeaway, I think, from what both programs have done is it is okay to start informal. I think some of us feel a little intimidated by, like, I have to have a structure, I have to have a plan. And so I will tell you, if we've got other Tufts folks on here, you're going to be getting an email from me, and we're just going to have an organizational meeting. So I'm excited to move forward with things, and I would love to continue this discussion. So once again, thank you to everybody. And again, if you're not already a SIG member, join the SIG, because then you'll be in the know on our other events. But otherwise, have a great Friday and a great weekend.